Welcome to the Twin Labs podcast, where we help you make better decisions using AI and digital twins. And today, we are going straight to the heart of the single biggest bottleneck in any solo operation, which is, well, you.
Right. Yeah, it always comes back to us, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, I want you to think about the last business decision you made that lost you money. Or, worse, a decision that lost you weeks of your time and left you totally burned out.
Or I'm sure everyone listening has one immediately coming to mind.
Exactly. But what if I told you that mistake wasn't just bad luck? What if I told you it was entirely predictable, mapped out decades ago by a billionaire, and likely caused by a biological glitch in your own brain?
That is quite the hook. But it's true.
Right. So picture this. You are a solopreneur, a freelancer, or a decision maker running a lean operation. Every single choice lands squarely on your shoulders. Which client do you accept? What exactly do you charge them?
How do you spend the next 4 hours of your day?
Yes. There is no board of directors sitting in your home office to interrogate your reasoning. There is no colleague in the next cubicle to tap you on the shoulder and flag a blind spot. Operating on gut instinct in this environment isn't just risky, it is incredibly dangerous.
It's the ultimate double-edged sword of independence. I mean, you have all the freedom you ever wanted, but you also carry all the cognitive risk.
Yeah, one bad call can cost you a month of revenue. And a pattern of bad calls. That is the exact recipe for the kind of severe burnout that takes years to recover from.
Well, most people in this position make decisions the way they drive a familiar route home, like competently most of the time, but relying far more on instinct, habit, and subconscious processing than they actually realize.
Right, you just sort of zone out.
Exactly. And that works perfectly fine, right up until a deer jumps into the road.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we aren't just here to tell you that being a solopreneur is hard. You already know that. We are here to give you a system to fix it. We are looking at the legendary Charlie Munger.
Warren Buffett's longtime business partner.
The one and only. He was a brilliant, unconventional thinker, and he developed a concept called the lattice work of mental models. And I want to be clear here. This isn't just a list of 10 generic business rules to memorize.
No, not at all.
It's a highly flexible, dynamic system drawn from psychology, economics, physics, and biology. Think of it as installing a silent, exceptionally rational co-founder directly into your brain.
Yeah, and what this lattice work actually is an interconnected web of 129 highly practical ideas.
Yeah.
Munger diagnosed a very specific problem in human cognition.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, most individuals and even massive organizations fail not because they lack information, but because they rely on isolated facts. They apply a single model to every single problem.
Right. If your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Exactly. But pulling from multiple disciplines gives you analytical depth. So when that friendly but disorganized client approaches you, it doesn't just trigger an emotional response.
It triggers like other frameworks.
Yeah, right. It triggers an opportunity cost calculation from economics, a base rate risk assessment from probability, and a boundary check from behavioral psychology.
That makes so much sense. So our mission for this deep dive is to equip you, the listener, with this commercially grounded framework. We are going to show you exactly how to use it to stop second-guessing yourself, stop leaving money on the table, and build a highly profitable, sustainable venture.
It's a game changer once you see it.
So let's jump right into the first major hurdle. Why did Munger, a billionaire investor, start his entire framework with psychology rather than, I don't know, business strategy or accounting?
Well, he placed psychology first for a very deliberate, almost defensive reason. Before you can accurately analyze a market or price a service, you have to understand how your own mind is actively, biologically sabotaging your analysis.
Wow, sabotaging.
You usually know what you should do, but an evolutionary psychological bias determines what you actually do. What's fascinating here is that large organizations have structural compensations for this individual bias.
Like checks and balances.
Exactly. If an executive gets overly excited about a terrible merger, there is a committee to catch their over-optimism. There are finance teams to stress test the numbers. There are legal reviews designed specifically to slow things down.
And solo operators have absolutely none of that.
Zero. Solo operators have absolutely zero structural compensations for bias.
I mean, relying purely on your intuition as a solo decision maker is like driving down a highway at night by only looking at your hood ornament. You might feel like you're moving fast, you might even feel in control, but eventually you're going to crash into something massive that you just couldn't see coming because your field of vision was too narrow.
Which is exactly why building your own structural compensations is a matter of pure survival. And, it's worth noting early on that Twin Labs covers the structural side of this problem incredibly well.
They really do.
Yeah. AI tools can dramatically reduce the cognitive load on solopreneurs. When you have a system catching those basic data blind spots and processing the raw inputs, it frees you up to focus on decisions that require true, nuanced hand judgment.
Right, getting the machine to do the heavy lifting.
But here's the catch. To use those tools effectively, to even know what to ask them, you have to know what biases you are natively vulnerable to.
All right, so let's get into the mud. We're going to build a narrative here. Imagine you are pitching a new prospect. Let's call their company Apex Dynamics. We'll look at the 34 psychological tendencies Munger identified, starting with the people and feelings biases.
A very dangerous category.
Totally. First up is the liking or loving tendency. You get on the discovery call with the CEO of Apex Dynamics. Within 5 minutes, you realize you both grew up in the same city, you love the same obscure sports team, and they are just incredibly charismatic. What happens biologically?
Your brain starts releasing oxytocin. This is an ancient evolutionary mechanism. For hundreds of thousands of years, recognizing a member of your in-group or tribe was the literal difference between life and death.
Wow, so it's deep wiring.
Deep wiring. If someone was in your group, you lowered your guard, you shared resources, you trusted them. That biological wiring doesn't shut off just because you are negotiating a B2B contract over Zoom.
So what happens in the actual business context?
Well, Edward Thorndike identified this in 1920 as the halo effect. Because you like them, you subconsciously project their positive personal traits onto their professional competence.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, you ignore the fact that their project brief is a disaster. You ignore their vague answers about budget. And worst of all, you dramatically undercharge them because charging a friend full market rate feels like a tribal violation.
And then 3 weeks later, you are trapped in a miserable engagement.
Exactly.
But wait, I have to push back here. Empathy and relationship building are the absolute core of a solo consulting business. I mean, people buy from people they like. If I go into every call actively suppressing my feelings and treating prospects with cold suspicion, I'm going to lose every deal, right?
That is the perfect distinction to make. Munger isn't saying you shouldn't build rapport. The mental model here is about separating the relationship from the economic reality.
Okay, so you can be friendly.
You can absolutely enjoy a client's company, but the moment you move to pricing and scoping, you have to mentally switch tracks. And this is vital because of the reciprocal danger, the disliking or hating tendency.
Oh, the flip side.
Right. You might have a corporate client who has a very blunt, sterile communication style that you just find grating. The pay is excellent, the work is incredibly straightforward, but because your amygdala flags them as unpleasant, you focus exclusively on minor annoyances.
Like their legal department taking too long.
Exactly. And you reject easy, highly profitable work. Your feelings clouded the math.
Okay, that makes total sense. We are basically letting our caveman brains dictate our cash flow. And it gets more insidious with the envy and jealousy tendency. Let's say you are negotiating with Apex Dynamics, and right before you send the proposal, you open LinkedIn.
Always a mistake.
Always. You see a direct competitor post about landing a massive six-figure contract with a Fortune 500 company. Suddenly, you are questioning your entire business positioning. It produces real, visceral, psychological pain, even though your own situation hasn't changed one bit.
Charlie Munger famously said that it is not greed that drives the world, but envy. Envy corrupts your strategic focus. You might suddenly decide to pivot your entire business model to chase enterprise clients, completely abandoning your profitable mid-market niche.
Purely because someone else's highlight reel triggered your jealousy.
Yes. And while we are looking at social triggers, we have to talk about the reciprocation tendency. Robert Cialdini wrote about this extensively.
Oh, the influence guy.
Right. Let's say you offer the Apex Dynamics CEO a free, highly detailed 30-minute audit of their business before the pitch. You are utilizing a massive psychological lever.
Because they feel like they owe you.
By giving a favor, human psychology dictates a powerful, almost uncomfortable drive to return it. This drastically increases the probability they book the full engagement.
That sounds like a great sales tactic, honestly.
It is, but it works against you too.
Mm-hmm.
If a vendor or software rep gives you something for free, you will subconsciously favor them over a mathematically superior competitor. You have to be aware of when reciprocation is being used against you.
Sneaky. Similarly, you must guard against the influence from mere association tendency. Human brains are association machines. Feelings about one thing transfer instantly to another.
Very true.
So if you collaborate with a brand that has a questionable reputation, clients will unconsciously transfer that questionable reputation onto you, regardless of the quality of your actual work.
Guilt by association. So, I'm talking to Apex Dynamics, I like the CEO, I've offered a free audit, and now I'm feeling good. This brings us to the comfort and ego biases.
Right, this is where we sabotage our own internal processes. First up is the doubt avoidance tendency. The human brain views uncertainty as a physical threat.
It literally burns caloric energy to hold competing thoughts in tension.
Wow. So when the Apex CEO sends an email with a really vague inquiry about, maybe doing some strategy work, instead of asking 3 clarifying questions and sitting in the discomfort of not knowing, you rush to write a massive, comprehensive proposal just to resolve the feeling of doubt.
You are sprinting toward a conclusion without adequate information just to alleviate anxiety. And once you write that massive proposal, you instantly trigger the inconsistency avoidance tendency.
Wait, what does that mean in this context?
Well, humans have an intense desire to remain consistent with their past actions and stated beliefs. It's why changing our minds feels so difficult. Let's say you've offered the exact same service package for 2 years.
Okay.
Deep down, you know it no longer fits the market, and it certainly doesn't fit Apex Dynamics. But instead of throwing it out and building a bespoke offer, you just endlessly tweak the edges of the old package.
You are actively avoiding the discomfort of admitting your previous model is outdated. That ties right into simple, pain-avoiding psychological denial. Let's say your revenue has been completely flat for 3 months leading up to this pitch. Instead of looking at your accounting software, analyzing the data, and admitting that your core offer is fundamentally broken, you just pour yourself a coffee and say,
Oh, it's just a slow season.
right. Everyone in my network is struggling right now. You are unconsciously ignoring a lethal reality to protect your own ego.
Ego protection is perhaps the most expensive habit a solopreneur can have. It often manifests as the excessive self-regard tendency. Munger warned about this constantly.
We all think we're above average.
The vast majority of people overestimate their own abilities. You might assume your sales page is an absolute masterpiece of persuasive copywriting, right up until 3 different prospects tell you it's confusing.
But instead of changing the copy, your self-regard makes you conclude that the prospects are just stupid.
Exactly.
We see that all the time. The market just doesn't get my genius excuse.
Exactly. And this naturally pulls us into the distorted reality biases, where our perception of time and value completely detaches from reality. The biggest culprit here is the over-optimism tendency.
Oh, I'm so guilty of this. You look at the Apex project and think, I can knock this out in 2 weeks. It inevitably takes 5 weeks. You overestimate the positive outcomes, assume everything will go perfectly, and completely underestimate the friction, the revisions, and the risk.
Because your brain is simulating the best-case scenario.
Yeah.
And when things inevitably don't go as planned, the deprival superreaction tendency kicks in. This is rooted in behavioral economics, specifically Daniel Kahneman's work on loss aversion.
Right. Losing hurts more than winning feels good.
Yes. Losing something you already have feels mathematically and psychologically far worse than gaining something new feels good.
Wait, how does that apply to a solo business specifically?
Well, imagine you have a legacy client on a R10,000 monthly retainer. They're a nightmare to work with and drain all your energy. You know you should fire them to free up capacity for a R25,000 client.
But you don't.
But the thought of losing that R10,000 triggers a super reaction. You will irrationally hold on to a bad situation just to avoid the pain of loss.
That is painfully relatable.
Conversely, you can use this ethically in sales. If you reframe a retainer renewal for a client, not as them buying a new month of service, but as them protecting the steady progress and revenue they have already achieved, renewals become significantly easier. You are speaking the language of their loss aversion.
That is brilliant. It's subtle, but it completely changes the negotiation. Another massive distortion is the contrast misreaction tendency. We judge value by contrast, not by absolute measure.
Like an optical illusion.
Exactly. Our optical systems literally evolved to see contrast. A dark predator moving against a light background, not absolute light levels.
Wow.
So in business, you look at your R8,500 consulting package and you think, I can't charge more, but only because you are contrasting it against a cheap competitor on Upwork charging R4,000.
You aren't actually looking at the intrinsic absolute value of what you deliver to the client.
Exactly, you anchor to the wrong background, and then you suffer from the availability misweighing tendency. This is the brain's habit of heavily overweighting vivid, recent, or emotionally charged information.
Oh, this one is huge.
Say one single client completely ghosts you on a R50,000 invoice. It's highly emotional. Suddenly, you think every client in the industry is a grifter. You start demanding 100% payment upfront, which kills your conversion rate. Meanwhile, your actual historical accounting data shows 92% of your clients have paid on time for 5 years.
You let one vivid memory overrate years of statistical reality.
Yep. Which brings us to the action and environment biases. How do we actually behave day to day when we're alone at our desks? The foundation here is the reward and punishment super response tendency.
It sounds obvious to say incentives drive behavior, but solopreneurs constantly misalign their own incentives. It's operant conditioning.
Like giving a dog a treat.
Basically, yeah. If you promise yourself a full Friday off, only after you finish the Apex proposal, suddenly your procrastination magically vanishes. But if you reward yourself with a break before you do the hard work, you've broken the behavioral loop.
But we aren't just robots responding to treats. We also have the curiosity tendency. Human beings have a natural hardwired drive to explore and learn. But in the solo business world, the tyranny of urgent deadlines just buries it.
You don't have time to be curious.
Right. If you don't aggressively protect your curiosity, say, blocking 60 minutes every Thursday morning just to read research outside your specific niche, you'll stagnate. A month later, a random article you read during that time might be the exact insight you use to design a higher value offer for Apex Dynamics.
That requires structuring your environment to allow for exploration. Now, when you finally get back to the negotiation table, you encounter the Kantian fairness tendency. People generally expect fair treatment and extend it by default.
So it's the golden rule. Treat others how you want to be treated.
Essentially, yes. If you reframe a tense price negotiation with the Apex CEO and say, look, let's structure this contract so that it protects both of us. If our roles were reversed, I would want exactly these same performance guarantees.
That's powerful.
Suddenly, you disarm their defensive posture. It's no longer a zero-sum fight. It's mutual problem solving.
That is much better than giving in to the social proof tendency, which is deadly for solopreneurs. You scroll through social media and see 10 different creators launching a low-ticket $97 digital product. Your brain screams, the tribe is moving, we must move too.
And then what do?
You spend 3 weeks building a $97 product that makes absolutely no sense for your high-end B2B consulting audience. You have to stop and ask, would I build this if literally no one else on the internet was doing it?
You must ask that question before the stress influence tendency takes over. High stress doesn't just make you feel bad. It literally impairs your prefrontal cortex and amplifies every single other bias we've discussed.
It makes you regress to your most primal reactive instincts.
Exactly.
I have a hard and fast rule about this. Never, ever send a project proposal or reply to a difficult client email when you are hungry, angry, or exhausted. Just save it as a draft and walk away. The number of times I read a draft the next morning and thought, thank God I didn't send that, is staggering.
It's the smartest thing you can do. And speaking of daily realities, there's the use it or lose it tendency. Neurological pathways degrade if they aren't fired.
So if you don't use a skill, it fades.
Right. If you were a designer who hasn't practiced a live sales call in 3 months because you had a full roster, your closing skills are going to slip. You have to run mock calls during slow periods.
You also have to physically guard your decision-making windows against the drug misinfluence tendency. This isn't just about illicit substances. It means no major strategic business decisions after 8 p.m. or after 2 glasses of wine at a networking event.
Or when you were running on 3 hours of sleep and pure caffeine, your judgment is chemically altered.
And we have to zoom out and plan for the macro timeline with the senescence misinfluence tendency. This is the biological reality of aging. Your cognitive stamina and physical capacity at 55 will not be what they were at 25.
It's inevitable.
Building standard operating procedures and documenting your workflows today so your business can run without your brute force daily presence in a decade isn't morbid. It is highly rational biological planning.
Meanwhile, in the short term, you have to aggressively interrogate the authority misinfluence tendency. Human beings are conditioned from childhood to obey authority figures.
Oh, the guru effect.
Yes. If a massive industry influencer declares that a specific, highly expensive CRM software is the only way to scale, solopreneurs will blindly buy it, even if it's far too complex for their needs. You have to separate the authority of the speaker from the utility of the advice.
Otherwise, you fall straight into the twaddle tendency.
Yes, twaddle. Munger loved this word. It means people will just fill open space with low-value noise. Unstructured 60-minute client check-in calls are almost always twaddle.
So what's the fix?
A 25-minute call with a strict 3-point agenda produces vastly better outcomes. You have to ruthlessly cut the noise.
And if you want people to actually follow your strict 25-minute agenda, you use the reason-respecting tendency. This is a behavioral hack. If you give someone a specific reason, even a somewhat obvious one, compliance skyrockets.
Give me an example.
Okay, if you email a past client and say, could you write me a testimonial, you might get a 20% response rate. If you say, could you write me a testimonial because it helps other founders in your exact position understand the value of this process, your response rate will double. Humans are wired to comply when the word because is introduced.
Now we enter the final and perhaps most dangerous psychological territory, the analysis paralysis biases. These are the models that actively corrupt the data you use to make decisions.
Oh boy.
Confirmation bias is the classic trap. You already believe that your weekly newsletter is your best marketing channel because you enjoy writing it. So you only look at the positive open rates, and you completely ignore the terrible click-through and conversion rates.
You are unconsciously seeking only the evidence that confirms your pre-existing belief and dismissing everything that contradicts it.
Exactly. It's so easy to do.
And then there's hindsight bias. Let's go back to our Apex Dynamics pitch. Say you win the contract, but it turns into a total disaster. The client pays late, the scope triples. Afterwards, you sit at a bar with a friend and say, you know, I knew there were red flags from day one. I knew it was going to fail.
But did you really?
No. You reconstructed those warning signs after the fact to make yourself feel like you have an orderly, predictable worldview. Hindsight bias prevents you from actually learning from unpredictable failures because you pretend you predicted them.
Because your brain wants to stop processing uncertainty. This leads directly to the first conclusion bias. The CEO of Apex says, I love the proposal, this looks great. Your brain immediately treats the deal as closed.
You stop asking qualifying questions, you cancel your other lead generation calls for the week, and you don't aggressively follow up to secure the deposit. You jumped at the first positive signal and shut down your analytical engine.
Which is often compounded by the anchoring bias. This is huge in pricing. Let's say your very first client 3 years ago paid you $12,000 for a website. Your brain unconsciously anchors to that number.
Even if you're way better now.
Today, you are vastly more skilled. Your work generates 10 times the ROI, but you still find yourself quoting new prospects around R15,000 or R18,000. You are permanently tethered to an irrelevant historical anchor.
And while you are anchored to the past, you might be blinded in the present by the incentive-caused bias. Munger said, show me the incentive, and I will show you the outcome.
It's a fundamental truth.
If Apex Dynamics offers you a massive 100% upfront payment, suddenly your perception of reality distorts. You start ignoring their vague briefs and demanding personality simply because the upfront financial incentive is so overwhelmingly strong.
And while you're ignoring those red flags, you're probably dealing with Pavlovian association in your actual workspace. The ping of a chat message or an email notification automatically pulls you out of deep work.
Your heart rate spikes.
It's a conditioned response.
Yeah.
You've trained yourself to break your own focus, like a dog salivating in a bell.
And when your focus is broken, you make poor long-term choices, falling victim to hyperbolic discounting. This is the human tendency to heavily overvalue immediate rewards and drastically discount future rewards.
Like taking a quick buck now.
Exactly. You might take a quick, low-paying R4500 project right this minute purely for the dopamine hit of closing a sale, instead of spending those same hours pitching a R28,000 project that won't pay out for 6 months. You sacrifice massive long-term value for a tiny immediate hit.
You also have to watch out for the representativeness bias. Let's say a new prospect sounds and looks exactly like your absolute best, most profitable client. They use the same industry buzzwords. They dress the same.
Your brain uses a heuristic, a mental shortcut.
You judge them by a superficial pattern and assume they will also be a great client, so you skip your normal, rigorous qualification process. 3 months later, you realize they're a completely disorganized nightmare.
Finally, holding all of this in place is the status quo bias. You know your invoicing software is terrible. It takes you 3 hours a month to reconcile. But you keep using it because researching and switching to a new platform feels temporarily disruptive. You prefer a painful, inefficient status quo to the short-term effort of improvement.
Okay, That is 33 biases.
Mm.
But Munger said there's a 34th, a final boss, the ultimate amplifier, the Lollapalooza effect.
Wait, what is that?
The Lollapalooza effect is what happens when 3, 4, or 5 of these biases operate in the exact same direction at the exact same time. It creates an overwhelmingly powerful, nonlinear force that can make rational people do completely irrational things.
Give me a scenario.
Imagine you are doing a big product launch. You have social proof because all your peers are doing launches. You have the liking tendency because your audience is cheering you on in the comments. You have over-optimism about your timeline, and you have incentive-caused bias because you desperately want the revenue.
That's a dangerous cocktail.
When those 4 hit at once, you will ignore all the data telling you that your product isn't ready, you will launch early, and you will damage your reputation. That is a Lollapalooza.
Okay, so that is a terrifying mirror to hold up to ourselves. Our psychology is a minefield, constantly feeding us distorted data, making us undercharge, overwork, and ignore reality. We cannot trust our initial reactions.
We really can't.
So, what does this all mean? How do we actually stop the Lollapalooza effect in its tracks before it bankrupts our solo business?
We do it by introducing the second category, thinking tools. If our raw biological instincts are the chaotic river, these 18 frameworks are the concrete dam. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these aren't just business rules. They are cognitive scaffolds designed specifically to intercept your biases before you take action.
I love that. Cognitive scaffolds.
Let's start with the core defensive tools, beginning with Charlie Munger's absolute favorite inversion. Carl Jacobi, a famous mathematician, used to say, invert, always invert.
I love inversion. It completely flips the script. Usually a solopreneur sits down and asks, how do I succeed in doubling my revenue this year? That's a really hard, complex question to answer.
Very hard.
Inversion says, don't ask how to succeed. Ask what behaviors would guarantee that I fail completely and lose all my clients. Well, if I suddenly changed my pricing terms with zero warning, if I started delivering work a week late, and if I stopped replying to emails for 48 hours, I would definitely fail.
Right.
So the strategy becomes incredibly simple. Meticulously avoid doing those 3 things. Avoiding stupidity is mathematically much easier than striving for isolated moments of brilliance.
Exactly. And the most effective way to systematically avoid stupidity is the checklist approach. Atul Gawande wrote an entire book on this regarding surgery and aviation. Human memory fails under pressure. You need a simple 7-item checklist before you send any proposal. Is the scope clearly bounded? Are the payment terms explicit? Is the revision limit stated? Are the deliverables specific? What is the communication cadence? What are the success criteria? If you force yourself to pick those boxes, you override the doubt avoidance bias that wants you to rush the email.
Hold on, though. If I use a rigorous checklist for every single client interaction, won't I spend my entire day doing admin? Isn't that bureaucratic overkill for a solo operator?
That's a common misunderstanding of the tool. The checklist isn't for every email. It's for the critical, high-leverage inflection points. Proposals, contract signings, final handoffs. It takes 90 seconds to run a 7-point checklist, but it saves you 90 hours of scope creep down the line.
Okay, that makes sense.
And while you're running that checklist, you should be using 2-track analysis. This is where you evaluate an upcoming decision through 2 distinct lenses simultaneously, economic logic and human psychology.
Track 1 and track 2.
Yeah, right. Track 1. Does this new R20,000 package cover my profit margins and opportunity costs? Yes. Track 2. How will the client emotionally react to seeing this number presented this way? Will it trigger their loss aversion? If the economic track and the psychological track don't align, the decision is not ready to be executed.
Which brings us to a concept stolen straight from structural engineering margin of safety. If an engineer is building a bridge and they calculate that the heaviest truck that will cross it is 10,000 pounds, they do not build a bridge designed to hold exactly 10,000 pounds.
They build it to hold 30,000 pounds.
Exactly. They account for the unpredictable. In a solo business, your margin of safety is cash and time. It means having 3 to 6 months of operating expenses in the bank. Why? Because if you have no margin of safety, you operate from desperation, and desperation makes you accept toxic clients, which ruins your business. Cash is cognitive defense.
Cash allows you to stay firmly within your circle of competence. Tom Watson, the founder of IBM, said, "I'm no genius. I'm smart in spots, but I stay around those spots."
That's a great quote.
If you are an exceptional world-class copywriter, and a client asks if you can also build out the back-end database for their website, your ego wants to say yes. Your incentive bias wants the extra money, but it is outside your circle of competence. It will take you 4 times as long to do, the quality will be mediocre, and you will eat unrecoverable time. Say no, refer it out, and protect your reputation.
But what if I need to expand my circle? What if the market is changing? That's where we use advanced logic models, right? Starting with first principles thinking. Elon Musk popularized this, but it goes back to Aristotle.
Yes. First principles thinking is about stripping a complex problem down to its most fundamental, undeniable truths. Let's say you want to create a new service offering. Instead of looking at your competitors and just copying their packages, which is reasoning by analogy, you strip the problem down.
How do you do that practically?
You ask, what exact measurable problem does my target client actually have? What is the absolute most efficient way to solve it? And what is that solution fundamentally worth to their bottom line? You build up from those basic truths. You often find that what the market actually needs is totally different from what everyone else is currently selling.
And once you build that new offer, you have to apply second-order thinking. This is the ability to look past the immediate consequence of an action.
Looking past step 1.
Right. Let's go back to Apex Dynamics. Accepting their demanding, high-paying contract feels amazing at the first order. You get a big deposit today. But the second-order consequence is that their demands consume 110% of your cognitive capacity, meaning you have absolutely no time to market yourself.
And then what happens?
The third-order consequence is that when the Apex project ends in 6 months, your pipeline is completely empty and you go bankrupt. The long-term cost vastly outweighs the short-term gain. It's playing chess, not checkers. And to truly test if your strategy is sound, you use falsification. Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, championed this. Don't look for evidence that proves your idea is right. Look aggressively for evidence that proves it is wrong. So you actively try to break your own idea. Yes. If you have a new pricing model, don't ask your friends if they like it. Go to your 3 best, most honest clients and ask, tell me exactly why you wouldn't buy this. Their teardown will reshape and strengthen your product far better than any artificial validation would.
I love that. Seeking the brutal truth. Next, we have the razors. These are mental rules of thumb to slice through complex noise. The most famous is Occam's razor. The simplest explanation that accounts for all the evidence is usually the correct one.
Right.
If your inbound leads suddenly drop to 0, it is probably not a complex macroeconomic shift in global B2B procurement trends. It's probably because you stopped posting on LinkedIn and stopped asking for referrals 3 months ago. Don't overcomplicate your failures. And its partner is Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what is adequately explained by incompetence, oversight, or busyness.
I use this one almost daily.
If a client is 5 days late paying a R30,000 auto invoice, your immediate emotional reaction is that they are actively trying to screw you over, or they hate the work. You start writing a hostile email. Hanlon's razor forces you to pause. The simplest explanation is that their accounts payable person was out sick, or your email went to spam. Just send a polite, neutral reminder. You save the relationship and your blood pressure.
Although, pushback here, sometimes people are actually out to get you, or at least they're perfectly happy to exploit a solo operator. If I always assume incompetence, won't I get taken advantage of?
It's a matter of base rate probabilities. Hanlon's razor doesn't say malice doesn't exist. It says malice is statistically rare compared to simple oversight. You use the razor as your first filter to prevent an emotional overreaction. If they ignore 3 reminders, then you escalate. It's a tool for energy conservation.
Fair enough. Now, moving from interpersonal tools to system and risk models. Every solo operator needs to run scenario analysis. You can't just build a spreadsheet projecting your ideal revenue path to $1 million. You have to model your worst-case cash flow.
The doomsday scenario.
Yeah. What literally happens to your bank account if your biggest client pauses their contract tomorrow and a new client doesn't sign for 60 days? Running that scenario reveals the liquidity risks today, giving you time to secure a line of credit or cut expenses before the crisis hits.
And when you are managing that cash, beware of mental accounting. This is a behavioral finance trap identified by Richard Thaler. It's the tendency to treat money differently depending on where it came from.
Like treating tax refunds like free money?
Exactly. If you earn R50,000 from a hard consulting project, you guard it carefully. But if you get a R15,000 tax refund or surprise bonus, your brain labels it as free money or house money, and you blew it on unnecessary software or expensive dinners. But money is fungible. A dollar is a dollar. That R15,000 should be reinvested with the exact same ruthless discipline as your core income.
You have to be disciplined because the universe is chaotic. You have to prepare for black swan events. Nuts and Taleb coined this. These are the highly improbable, entirely unpredictable events that change everything overnight.
Like a pandemic.
A global pandemic, an AI breakthrough that automates your core service, a sudden change in Google's algorithm that wipes out 80% of your web traffic in a day. You cannot predict black swans. You can only survive them by building structural robustness, maintaining cash reserves, and having 3 different uncorrelated income streams so no single event can destroy you.
But while you were looking at the horizon for black swans, do not ignore the gray rhino events. Michelle Wicker developed this concept. The gray rhino is the massive 2-ton beast running directly at you that you are actively choosing to ignore.
What's a gray rhino for a freelancer?
Having one single client make up 60% of your total revenue is a gray rhino. You know it is incredibly dangerous. You know it gives them total leverage over you. But because it hasn't trampled you yet, you delay fixing it. Identifying it as a gray rhino forces you to confront the obvious danger.
All of these tools build to what Munger called structural wisdom. It's the pursuit of elementary worldly wisdom, mastering the big, fundamental ideas from all major academic fields. It's the lattice work of mental models itself, cross-pollinating these ideas. It's taking a multidisciplinary approach, like borrowing concepts from evolutionary biology to fix your market positioning, which we'll do in a minute.
And finally, executing all of this requires vivification, the ability to make abstract concepts vivid and concrete.
Give us an example of vivification.
If you go to a networking event and say, "I provide strategic operational consulting," people's eyes will glaze over. It's abstract. If you say, "I build diagnostic systems for specialized healthcare clinics that are busy but bleeding profit," they understand it instantly. You made the abstract vivid.
And applying all these different models prevents the man with the hammer tendency. You stop trying to solve every business constraint by just posting more content on social media, realizing that maybe your constraint isn't marketing at all, it's pricing elasticity.
That's a perfect transition.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We've purged our thinking of emotional bias. We have built structural cognitive scaffolds. Our minds are sharp. Now we have to look outward at the world. How do we actually extract financial value from our work without being crushed by the competition?
This is the survival phase.
It is wild to me how abstract, university-level macroeconomic theory directly dictates whether a freelance copywriter can afford to pay their rent this month.
It dictates absolutely everything. Most solopreneurs compete purely on price. They spend their days on platforms like Upwork fighting to be the cheapest option simply because they lack a moat. If you do not understand the underlying economic reality of your offering, the market will decide your worth for you. And make no mistake, the market is ruthless. It will drive your price down to the absolute floor of your profit margin.
And I should note here, the AI business advisory services at Twin Labs actually work through several of these exact economic principles. They show solopreneurs how to integrate AI tools into their workflows to generate leverage without accidentally undermining their own market value.
That's an important balance to strike.
Yeah, Twin Labs specifically examine how AI can act as a technology as friend to strengthen your competitive moat, rather than destroy it as a commodity.
That's a vital integration because technology changes the supply curve. So let's look at the 20 economic principles that govern your business reality, starting with pricing and value.
Okay, lay them on me.
The most fundamental law is supply and demand. If you are offering a generic service like social media management, and there are 50,000 other people offering the exact same thing, supply is essentially infinite. Because supply is high, prices must fall. To charge a premium, you have to constrain supply by hyper-specializing.
And once you specialize, you must test your elasticity. Solopreneurs are terrified to raise prices, but elasticity measures how demand changes when price changes. If you raise your prices by 20% and your close rate stays exactly the same, your service is price inelastic. You are leaving money on the table.
Opportunity cost is another massive blind spot. Every single choice you make has a hidden cost, the value of the next best alternative. If you spend 10 hours doing a low-level R6000 admin project for a demanding client, you didn't just earn R6000. You permanently lost 10 hours that could have been spent building a R40,000 digital course or pitching a high-tier retainer. Every time you say yes to something mediocre, you're actively saying no to something exceptional.
Which brings in David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage. Let's say you are a world-class strategist, but you're also reasonably good at graphic design. Because you are a solopreneur, you decide to design all your own slide decks to save money.
A classic mistake.
Economically, this is foolish. Even if you are better at design than a junior freelancer, your comparative advantage is strategy. You should outsource the design for R500 an hour and spend those hours selling strategy at R3000 an hour. Focus purely on where your advantage is greatest.
And you have to understand marginal utility. The first hour you spend optimizing your LinkedIn profile yields massive results. The 100th hour yields almost nothing. The 5th marketing channel you launch this week is going to bring in a tiny fraction of the leads of your first 2. You hit diminishing returns. Don't spread yourself thin. Consolidate your efforts where the marginal utility is highest.
Also, never forget the time value of money. Money today is mathematically worth more than money tomorrow due to inflation and investment potential. If you agree to net 60 payment terms with a corporate client, waiting 60 days to get your R50,000 has a literal mathematical cost to your business. You are giving them a free zero-interest loan. You must negotiate deposits upfront.
Moving into market dynamics, let's talk about incentives and the agency problem. The agency problem occurs when the interests of the principal, you, and the agent, someone you hire, diverge.
Like hiring a virtual assistant.
Exactly. If you hire a virtual assistant on an hourly rate to do lead generation, their incentive is simply to log as many hours as possible. Your incentive is to get high-quality leads quickly. That's a conflict. But if you shift their pay to a base rate plus a strong bonus tied directly to the number of qualified calls they book, you align the incentives.
You also have to navigate information asymmetry and adverse selection. In many consulting markets, buyers don't know who is an expert and who is a fraud. There is information asymmetry. Because the buyer can't tell the difference, they assume the risk is high, so they default to the cheapest option.
And then the good providers leave.
Right. The high-quality, expensive providers get pushed out of the market. This is adverse selection. You combat this by aggressively signaling your quality publishing transparent case studies, deep dive teardowns, and proprietary roadmaps. You have to destroy the asymmetry so they feel safe paying your premium. So it's basically proving you aren't a lemon. And while we're protecting ourselves, we use upfront deposits to prevent moral hazard. Moral hazard happens when someone takes more risks or acts poorly because they are protected from the consequences.
So true.
If a client hires you with zero money down, they have no skin in the game. They will miss meetings, delay feedback for weeks, and change the scope because it costs them nothing. Require a 50% non-refundable deposit, and magically, they become highly engaged and respectful of your time.
And always, always apply the Pareto principle. The 80-20 rule is an economic law. Roughly 80% of your profit comes from 20% of your clients. Conversely, 80% of your headaches come from a different 20% of your clients. Identify the vital few who drive your business, treat them like absolute royalty, and fire the bottom 20% who are draining your margins.
Because if you don't aggressively curate your environment, you fall victim to Gresham's law. In economics, this states that bad money drives out good. If you stay on low-rate gig platforms like Fiverr or Upwork, where the market expectation is cheap, rapid turnaround work, the sheer volume of low-quality providers will drag your perceived value down. You cannot charge premium rates in a discount store. You have to leave the platform entirely.
You must leave because of creative destruction. Joseph Schumpeter coined this. Capitalism constantly destroys old structures to create new ones. AI is actively displacing commodity content creation, basic coding, and entry-level design. That is a fact. The market is destroying those margins. So you have to constantly move up the value chain into complex strategy, relationship management, and high-level synthesis areas AI cannot replace yet.
You also need to objectively calculate your intrinsic business value. If you couldn't work for 6 months, what would your business generate? What is it actually worth to a rational outside buyer based on predictable future cash flows?
For most solos, the answer is zero.
Calculating this forces you to realize whether you are actually building an asset or if you have just created a very stressful, unsellable job for yourself.
And when you are evaluating your market position, you must remember Benjamin Graham's concept of Mr. Market. The market is not a perfectly rational calculator. It is a manic, depressive entity. If competitors panic during an economic dip and start heavily discounting their services, Mr. Market is depressed. Do not join the panic. Hold your rates steady. Use their irrationality to confidently position yourself as the premium, stable option.
Also, understand the power of tax deferral. Delaying tax payments through legal, structured retirement accounts isn't just about saving a few bucks today. It allows your pre-tax capital to compound over decades. That compounding is the eighth wonder of the world.
And deeply understand value creation versus value capture. You might optimize a client's sales funnel and create R500,000 in new value for them. But if your flat fee was only R10,000, you captured a tiny fraction of the value you created. You need to structure performance-based contracts that allow you to capture a fair percentage of the upside you generate.
Because if you don't capture that capital, obsolescence risk will get you. Every single business model, skill set, and software stack eventually decays. Without continuous capital reinvestment into innovation and new skills, you will become obsolete.
So, to prevent obsolescence and capture value, we need a moat. Warren Buffett popularized this. How do you build a castle that competitors can't invade? Let's explore the 19 competitive advantage models.
The ultimate goal is an economic moat, a structural advantage that makes price comparison totally irrelevant to the buyer. One way is through incredibly deep, specialized niche expertise. If you are the only person who knows how to migrate a specific legacy banking software to the cloud, you have a moat.
You can also build cost advantages. If you use AI and automations to streamline your entire administrative, research, and delivery workflow, your underlying costs plummet. Your effective hourly rate goes up massively, allowing you to either enjoy higher margins or underprice competitors while remaining highly profitable.
And differentiation. Your personal story, your unique tone of voice, your proprietary frameworks. If you sound exactly like every other consultant on LinkedIn, you have no moat. But if your perspective is entirely unique, you become the only logical choice for a specific type of client.
You also want to build in switching costs. If you write a 10-page strategy memo and hand it to a client, they can easily fire you. But if you embed your reporting dashboards, your specific SOPs, and your deliverables deeply into their daily operations, replacing you becomes an administrative nightmare. The switching cost is too high. They will stay.
Network effects are incredibly powerful too. This is where a product becomes more valuable as more people use it. As a solopreneur, if you build a private, vetted community or a mastermind group, every new high-quality member adds value for all the existing members. The value of the asset scales independently of your direct time.
Similarly, you must leverage scale economies on the supply side. If you sell one-on-one consulting, your costs scale linearly with your revenue. You hit a ceiling. But if you sell a digital product, a software template, or recorded training, the 100th copy costs you absolutely nothing to produce. The marginal cost is zero. That is scale.
And respect the learning curve. By the time you execute your 50th client engagement in a specific niche, you are structurally faster, sharper, and more intuitive than you were at your 10th. A beginner entering your market literally cannot compete with your speed of execution. Your experience is a moat.
But none of this matters if you don't have distribution control. If you build your entire business relying on the algorithm of a single social media platform, you are a tenant, and the algorithm is the landlord. They can evict you overnight by changing the rules. If you own your email list, you own your distribution. You control the pipeline.
Which is why you want to aim for winner-take-most markets. In massive generalized markets, the wealth is spread out. But in a hyper-specific micro-niche, the recognized #1 leader often captures 80% of the premium work. It is economically far superior to be famous in a tiny, obscure niche than to be totally unknown in a massive, generalized market.
But as you build this, you must assess your moat durability. A specific software skill can be copied by a competitor in 6 months. But deep, high-trust industry relationships and a reputation for integrity, that is durable for decades.
You have to look at the macro industry structure. Are you entering rational versus cutthroat competition? General freelance graphic design is cutthroat. Everyone is slashing prices to survive. Specialized corporate governance consulting is rational competitors respect the pricing floor. Choose a rational battlefield.
And leverage platform economics if you can. Can you build a system where you connect 2 groups of people to each other, like freelance designers to vetted startup founders, and take a percentage of the value created rather than doing the labor yourself?
But as you grow, maintain ruthless capacity discipline. If you overpromise, take on too much work, and stretch your focus too thin, your quality will inevitably drop. You will burn out, your clients will leave, and you will destroy your own carefully built moat. Constraining your supply and saying no protects the asset.
And as you navigate all this, make sure you are surfing long waves. The shift to remote, asynchronous work and the integration of AI into knowledge work are massive, structural, decades-long economic waves. Build your services to ride them. Do not exhaust yourself trying to swim against the tide.
Keep lean operations. Being a solo operator with zero middle management and zero office overhead is not a weakness, it's a massive tactical weapon. A 50-person agency takes 6 months and endless meetings to pivot their strategy. You can pivot over the weekend. Your agility is your strength.
And finally, the cancer surgery formula. Sometimes, despite all your systems, a toxic element enters the business. A nightmare client who drains your team, a partnership that turns sour. To save the organism, you have to completely, swiftly excise the toxic element. Fire the client, even if it hurts your cash flow this month, to save the broader health and sanity of your business.
So we've covered the psychology that clouds our judgment, the thinking tools to structure our minds, and the economics that dictate our value. But economics only tells us how markets behave under human influence.
So what dictates the rest?
Math and physics dictate the absolute, unbreakable limits of reality. To truly manage risk and scale a solo operation, we have to stop thinking in emotional certainties and start thinking in probabilities.
I'm going to push back here on behalf of the audience. I hear this all the time. Most creatives, designers, writers, and solopreneurs absolutely hate math. They treat their business like an art studio. It's all about vibes, feelings, inspiration, and aesthetic. But what you are saying is, we shouldn't treat it like an art studio. We should treat it like an engineering lab, or honestly, like a casino where we are the ones counting the cards.
This raises an important question. How do we apply rigorous logic to uncertain outcomes? The universe doesn't care about your vibes. Physics doesn't care if you feel inspired.
Ouch, but true.
That brings us to the 12 math and probability models, starting with the concept of expected value. This is how professional poker players think. Let's say you have two options. Option A is a pitch with a 20% chance of landing a R50,000 contract. Option B is a pitch with a 95% chance of landing a R5,000 contract.
Most people would pick B.
Right. Your loss-averse brain screams to take option B because it's safe. But the math says the expected value of A is R10,000 because that's 20% of 50K, while the expected value of B is only R4,750. You have to calculate the expected value to compare your options rationally over the long term.
And running those numbers requires basic arithmetic fluency. You don't need calculus, you just need to understand basic percentages. If you are currently making $120,000 a year and you systematically optimize your pricing and conversions to achieve just a 15% increase, you add $18,000 to your bottom line with 0 extra hours worked. If you aren't comfortable running those basic arithmetic scenarios, you are flying blind.
And you need probabilistic thinking based on base rates. A base rate is the historical average of a specific event happening. The base rate for brand new digital product launches is that the vast majority of them fail. Knowing that probability before you lock yourself in a room for 6 months to build a massive online course changes your behavior. It forces you to pre-sell it or test it small.
I love this next one, Bayesian updating. We talked earlier about finding metaphors for this. It's basically like navigating a ship through thick fog. You don't just steer wildly based on one brief flash of a lighthouse. You have an initial hypothesis of where you are, and as more landmarks become visible, you adjust your course degree by degree.
Exactly.
In business, don't jump for joy and hire a contractor just because you got one positive email inquiry. You update your beliefs slowly and iteratively as statistically significant, real data actually arrives.
Exactly. You adjust your priors, and as you gather that data, prepare for regression to the mean.
Yeah.
If you have an unbelievably record-breaking, massively profitable month, do not extrapolate that out for the rest of the year and upgrade your lifestyle. It is highly mathematically likely that your next month will regress back down to your historical average. Plan your cash flow conservatively.
You have to understand the normal distribution versus fat tails. A normal distribution is a bell curve. Most of your months will be average, hovering in the middle. But the modern digital economy is governed by fat tails or extreme outliers. You might write 50 articles that get average traffic, but occasionally a fat tail event happens. One piece of content goes viral and triples your business overnight. You need to structure your business to survive the average days while positioning yourself to capture those rare, massive upside events.
That's where power laws come in, the Pareto principle on steroids. In venture capital, one successful startup pays for 99 failures. In your solo business, 10% of your effort is probably driving 90% of your results.
Yeah.
You have to rigorously analyze your data to find out which specific marketing channel or which specific client profile is driving the power law. Once you find it, you disproportionately double down on it.
But before you try to scale that power law by buying expensive new software or hiring an agency, do a strict cost-benefit analysis. Don't buy software tools because they look cool. Ask 3 brutal questions. Will this tool literally save me quantifiable time? Will it directly make me money? Or will it significantly reduce my risk? If the answer to all 3 is no, close the tab and don't buy it.
Because you want your capital, your time, and your efforts. Compounding. Compound interest isn't just for bank accounts. A weekly newsletter to 50 people might seem insignificantly small. But if you publish consistently, improving slightly every week for 3 years, the audience growth and the trust compound into a massive, highly leveraged asset.
And as it compounds, you want to build optionality. Optionality is the right, but not the obligation, to take an action. Run small, cheap experiments, a new tiny service, a different content format that have strictly capped downsides but uncapped upsides. If it fails, you brush it off. If it works, it fundamentally changes your business trajectory.
But never, ever risk the whole farm on an experiment. That's Kelly-type thinking. The Kelly criterion is a mathematical formula used by gamblers and investors to determine bet sizing. The core lesson for solopreneurs is this: even if the odds are heavily in your favor, you never bet your entire core operating capital on one single product launch or one risky marketing campaign. A string of bad luck could take you to zero. Always protect your baseline survival.
And finally, for the math section, use permutations and combinations. Solopreneurs often feel they need to pause their business and spend a year learning a totally brand new complex skill to make more money. Usually you don't. You can mathematically recombine your existing skills, your current audience, and new price points to create entirely new, highly valuable offerings.
Now, to physically scale those offers in the real world, we move to the 11 physics and engineering models.
Okay, what's first?
First is critical mass. In nuclear physics, it's the minimum amount of material needed for a chain reaction. In business, when you start, growing an audience or a client base is pure, exhausting pushing. But once you hit a certain critical mass of reputation and past clients, the referrals and inbound leads create a self-sustaining chain reaction. Growth suddenly becomes easier.
But to handle that growth, you need leverage. Archimedes said, "Give me a lever long enough and I shall move the world." A single, perfectly crafted, highly persuasive sales page on your website works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for years without you ever having to speak. That is massive leverage.
But as you build these leverage systems, you must build in redundancy. If you look at a Boeing 747, it has multiple backup systems for everything. Having only one major client is a crisis waiting to happen. If they leave, your business collapses. Redundancy means having backup income streams, backup lead generation methods, and cash reserves. It might feel inefficient in the short term, but it is the physics of survival.
And you have to trust the physics of breakpoints and phase transitions. Think about water. You can heat water from 1 degree all the way to 99 degrees, and structurally nothing changes. It's just hot water. But at exactly 100 degrees, a phase transition occurs. It becomes steam. It can power a locomotive.
That's a great analogy.
In your business, you might publish content or pitch clients for 99 days with absolutely zero visible traction. You feel like a failure. But on day 100, momentum suddenly tips. The energy was accumulating invisibly the whole time. You have to trust the accumulation.
To accelerate getting to that break point, you have to ruthlessly remove friction and increase efficiency. Every extra click in your onboarding process, every confusing jargon-filled line in your invoice, every delayed email response, that is friction. It bleeds energy from the system. Removing it directly and instantly improves client retention.
And always maintain safety margins. We talked about this in economics, but in engineering, it means scheduling buffers. If a client project should take 10 hours, quote, 13, safety margins are not pessimism. They are the acknowledgement that friction exists in the real world.
You also want to engineer positive feedback loops. This is the holy grail. A great client gets a great result. They give you a glowing referral, which brings you another great client, who gives you another referral. The output feeds the input.
But counterintuitively, you also need negative feedback loops. In engineering, negative feedback stabilizes a system like a thermostat, turning off the heat when the room gets too warm. In your business, set a rule. If my calendar hits 90% capacity, I automatically raise my prices by 10% on all new proposals. It's a self-correcting mechanism that automatically prevents you from burning out.
But no matter how well you engineer the system, you will eventually hit bottlenecks. Eliyahu Goldratt's theory of constraints says a system can only move as fast as its slowest point.
And for us.
For a solopreneur, the ultimate constraint, the primary bottleneck, is almost always your own cognitive capacity and focus. You only have so many hours of deep thought a day, so you automate, you decline meetings, and you outsource specifically to protect that central bottleneck.
You protect your focus so you can capture nonlinearity. In a linear world, working 10% harder gets you 10% more money. In a nonlinear world, a tiny input like spending 2 hours writing a perfectly timed, deeply insightful cold email to a specific CEO can produce a massive, nonlinear $500,000 contract. You want to engineer your day to allow for nonlinear strikes.
This all dictates your system resilience versus fragility. Nassim Taleb talks about anti-fragility. A fragile business is like a glass vase. When market disruption hits, it shatters. A resilient business is like a plastic cup. It survives the drop unchanged. But an anti-fragile business is like the human immune system. It actually uses the chaos and the stress to get stronger. When a massive disruption hits your industry, your agile, lean operation thrives and captures market share, while the bloated, fragile agencies collapse under their own overhead.
Okay, so a business is built on math and physics, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It survives in an ecosystem. It is a living, breathing, evolving organism. If you don't adapt, you die. This brings us to the final disciplines, biology and evolution. It is fascinating how Charles Darwin's evolutionary theory applies perfectly to market positioning. It's not about being the objectively best or smartest business in the world. It's about being the most adapted to your specific, localized environment.
Exactly. Survival of the fittest doesn't mean survival of the strongest. It means survival of the most adaptable. Let's look at the 6 biology models. First is evolution by natural selection. In the business ecosystem, market sentiment doesn't matter. What your peers say they like on social media is totally irrelevant. The only valid biological survival data is revenue retention. The market selects what it pays for. If a product doesn't generate profit, natural selection kills it.
Which means we have to navigate adaptation and fitness landscapes. The landscape is always shifting. What worked beautifully in 2023, say a specific social ad strategy, might be a dead, barren landscape today. You have to constantly send out scouts, test new environments, and adapt your offerings.
Because of the Red Queen effect. This comes from evolutionary biology, referencing Alice in Wonderland. The Red Queen tells Alice she has to run as fast as she can just to stay in the exact same place.
That's exhausting but true.
Your competitors are not static. They are constantly upgrading their software, refining their skills, and improving their marketing. If you stand completely still and rely on last year's skills, you aren't maintaining your position. You are actively falling behind.
So to survive without exhausting yourself, you look for niches and ecological competition. In nature, 2 species cannot occupy the exact same ecological niche without one outcompeting the other. Don't fight a brutal war in a massive, crowded ocean like general digital marketing. Shrink your focus. Dominate a micro-niche like CRM optimization for hospitality businesses. You become the apex predator of a small pond and avoid direct competition entirely.
But you must respect population dynamics. Biological populations explode during times of abundant resources and collapse when resources become scarce. During an economic boom phase, everyone floods your niche. Leads are easy. Do not permanently expand your fixed costs like signing a 5-year office lease during the boom, because a consolidation phase always follows.
And when you do inevitably lose a client or fail a launch, you must use autopsy learning. In medicine, we dissect the failure to see exactly what went wrong. Write a literal 1-page autopsy document after every lost deal. What happened? Were there red flags? Was my pricing off? What specific checklist item will I add to prevent this next time? That document becomes your institutional memory and a massive competitive advantage.
Which leads us to the 9 organizational thinking models for solos. Even though you are a solo organism, you have to operate with the discipline of a larger entity. You need corporate governance. Run a formal quarterly board review for yourself. Block off a Friday. Open your spreadsheets and look at your revenue targets, your capacity, and your strategic priorities. Without this governance, the tyranny of daily tasks will cause you to drift off course.
And you have to implement incentive design on yourself. Align your own short-term behavior with your long-term goals. If you need to build a new website, tie a significant personal reward to its completion. And realize that culture as a control system applies to a company of one. Your culture isn't a ping-pong table. It is your behavior. Your email response times, your professional boundaries, how strictly you handle scope creep, that becomes your culture. You actively train your clients on how they are allowed to treat you.
Also, beware of bureaucratic inertia. Large companies keep useless departments simply because they've always existed. Solopreneurs do this too. Kill any software, any weekly meeting, or any reporting system that you are just maintaining out of habit. Be ruthless in your pruning.
And vigorously fight information suppression. When you have a terrible financial month, your biological instinct is to avoid looking at the spreadsheet because it causes pain. You have to force yourself to look at the bad data. Suppressing bad news just lets the rot spread to the bone.
And when communicating with clients or contractors, always use the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and why. Ambiguity in a project brief always leads to disputes during delivery. State exactly who is doing what, by when, and most importantly, why it matters to the broader goal.
Standard operating procedures, or SOPs, are your best friend here. Document your workflows. It drastically lowers your cognitive load, ensures consistent quality, and makes the business a transferable asset if you ever decide to sell it.
And if you do hire help, remember the rule of talent, trust, and delegation. One high-trust, brilliant, expensive collaborator is worth 10 cheap, mediocre ones. The management overhead, the friction, and the revisions required to manage cheap labor will crush your margins and your soul.
Finally, avoiding madness in crowds. Charles Mackay wrote about this in the 1800s. If every single solopreneur in your feed is suddenly pivoting to the exact same strategy, like launching a specific type of AI agency, ignore the groupthink. Run your own data. Calculate your own base rates. The crowd is almost always wrong at the extremes, and following them blindly will lead you right off a cliff.
That is so important.
Okay, take a deep breath. We have covered a massive array of models, 129 concepts stretching from the neurochemistry of the brain to the physics of leverage to the evolutionary biology of niches. I know the listener is likely sitting there thinking, this is amazing, it makes total sense, but how on earth am I supposed to memorize 129 academic concepts by Monday morning when I sit down at my desk?
The good news is you don't have to. You absolutely do not need 129 models to start seeing massive benefits. You only need a weekly habit and about 8 to 10 core concepts to radically, permanently alter your business trajectory.
It's exactly like learning chords on a guitar. You don't need to know every single obscure, diminished jazz chord in existence to play a great song. You just need to know how to combine 3 basic chords smoothly to make music. So here is the actionable execution. We call it the rule of 3 practice.
Here is your homework for this week. Pick one real, consequential decision you're facing right now. Just one. Then pull 3 models from different categories that we discussed today.
Let's say you have that client proposal sitting in your drafts folder. Before you hit send, pause. Use the liking tendency from psychology. Ask yourself, am I undercharging simply because I had a nice chat with this person? Then use opportunity cost from economics. If I commit 20 hours a week to this, what lucrative project am I giving up? And then use inversion from our thinking tools. What would make this project an absolute unmitigated disaster, and how do I prevent that in the contract? Write out 1 sentence for each. How does this model change my thinking? Then, and only then, make your decision.
Or, if you were looking at a pricing change, use the anchoring bias to see if you were stuck in the past. Use elasticity to realize your current clients might not even care about a 15% bump. And use second-order thinking to project how this higher price elevates your market positioning in 6 months. It takes literally 5 minutes, but it completely changes the structural quality of the choice.
And document this. Create a single document in Notion, Obsidian, Google Docs, whatever you use, and call it My Lattice Work. Record the models you used. Add a new one every 2 weeks. And I should point out for the 4th time that this is where the modern ecosystem gives you an unfair advantage. The AI learning tools at Twin Labs can radically accelerate this exact process.
It's a perfect use case.
It really is,
Yeah.
particularly for solopreneurs who want structured frameworks for applying AI to their decision-making, rather than just slapping random AI tools onto an unstructured, messy workflow. You can train an AI on these models to act as your sounding board.
That is the ultimate takeaway here. Charlie Munger's ultimate lesson is not about being a perfect, emotionless robot.
Yep.
It's about the fact that better thinking compounds. When you make systematically clearer decisions, you don't just avoid individual mistakes. You build a track record of choices that accumulate into genuine freedom, more revenue, better clients, and the elimination of decision fatigue.
If you build your own lattice work today, imagine what happens when you eventually pair your deeply structured, multidisciplinary human judgment with an AI twin that knows your mental models as well as you do. An intelligence that catches your cognitive biases, your overoptimism, your loss aversion, before you even articulate them. Who in the market would ever be able to compete with that level of decision intelligence? Think back to that solopreneur driving down the highway in the pitch black, staring only at the hood ornament, hoping they don't crash. Building this lattice work is how you finally turn on the headlights, pull up the GPS, and actually see the road ahead. Thank you for joining us today. Visit the Twin Labs website for more business insights.